Good evening, everyone. I would like to welcome you all to the January 10th, 2018 meeting of the Ascension Parish Planning Commission. Happy New Year to everyone. Please let the record reflect that all members are present, and please, I'd ask everyone to rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Can we get the introduction of staff, please?
Stacy Webb, Secretary for Planning Development.
Cody Morton, the Attorney for the Commission.
Jerome Fournier, Director of Planning and Development.
Eric Poche, Parish Planner.
Lance Brock, Zoning Official.
Sean Chereau, Engineering Review Agency.
Joey Turow, Parish Engineer.
All right. I want to thank everyone for coming tonight. It is a new year, and even though we're only 10 days in, usually most of the resolutions that are made in the new year are broken by now. But we have a very special presentation tonight of a resolution that I don't think will be broken for a long time. Last year, the council approved money to develop a new land use master plan. This is long overdue. We currently have a master plan that is in our land use development code. Just to let you know how outdated this so-called master plan is, it says in the opening statement, the purpose, the master plan and land use plan presents the recommendations of the Parish Planning Commission for the development of Ascension Parish from 2001 to 2003. That's supposedly the plan we're living by today. It was done back at the early part of this century, and just to let you know how off it was, it projected the total population of Ascension Parish by 2010 to be 95,695 people. The last digits I saw in 2010, our population was 12,000 souls greater than that, and obviously it has increased ever since that time. So last year, the council, in its great wisdom, decided to allocate new money to develop a revised and new master land use plan so that we can direct growth where growth is needed, but yet still preserve the rural part of our parish and the traditions of our parish. A selection committee met during the middle part of the year and towards the fall and screened the applicants. The unanimous decision was the Council for Planning Excellence, CPEX. That went then to the Finance Committee. It came before this commission. All of which, with the exception of one vote at the Finance Committee, adopted the Selection Committee's recommendation. And in December, the Parish Council approved the Council for Planning Excellence moving forward with our new Master Land Use Plan, which we hope to get accomplished this year. And that leads me into an introduction of a very special and capable woman, Ms. Boo Thomas from CPEX, who is here to give us a presentation regarding the Master Land Use Plan. Ms. Boo, how are you?
I'm great. Thank you so much, Chairman Pryor and all Planning Commission members. I'm pleased to be here and to be part of this process for the fastest growing parish in the whole state, and one of the fastest top 100 I hear in the whole nation. So it's time to do a plan. You're right, you have been really growing. So we're going to give you a brief presentation on what this plan is going to be like. We've cut it down from about 60 slides to about 30. So hopefully Janet Thorpe, who is our Director of Planning for the CPEX, will go through this and will answer any questions that you have, but she will be our project lead for this project, and so I think it's going to be a great process, and we would like to have each of you very involved in this whole process. So thank you so much for having us tonight, Chairman Pryor.
Thank you.
Janet Thorpe.
Thanks, Boo. So have been working on a number of comprehensive plans throughout the state and of Louisiana, and also had the fortune to work on the Gonzales plan, which I kind of got to know some of the Ascension Parish there and the connections, and so we're really looking forward to working on this. If you could start the PowerPoint, that'd be great. I'm not sure who. And I do have 30 slides, but I'm going to do a high-level kind of description, clip through these pretty quickly, and then we'll be happy to answer any questions that you have. So in addition to CPEX, we've got a firm called Fregonesi Associates, who has done a number of plans throughout the the state as well. And they're on the team because they have a modeling tool that we use to really figure out what the impacts of certain land uses are. And we're going to use that and talk to you a lot about that in the future. We also have an urban designer who worked on Gonzales with us, DRW Planning Studio. And then real key is CSRS because they're working on both the transportation and the floodplain management studies. And they're going to help us connect those dots and make sure that we're comprehensive in our approach to those. So as I mentioned, we worked on the Gonzales Comprehensive Plan and had a number of meetings and a lot of participation, and that was unanimously adopted several years ago. CPEX has worked on plans throughout the state, and also we do a lot of best practices manuals and ordinances, and so we really try to keep up to date with the latest thinking in both planning and zoning. So our general approach is overall kind of a standard planning approach, but we always customize it to where we are. In general, we start out with a lot of public outreach, interviews, tours, and really try to get to see the parish through the eyes of the people who live here. And then we look at existing conditions. We evaluate alternatives that are based on public input. We develop the plan and then always have a strategic implementation plan that is real clear as to what the first steps are that are needed for implementation, so it doesn't just sit on the shelf. I know everyone's afraid of that. We've developed a project overview and a schedule, and I'm going to go through those tasks kind of quickly. The first thing is we do a project kickoff, and since you do have 11 districts, we're going to offer to tour or interview the different council members in the districts. So we can really, that's a lot of touring for us, but it also will be invaluable to see the parish one-on-one with those people. We will also, we always start with what you already have. So I've read the 1998 plan. There's some good stuff in it. It is out of date and needs to be updated, but we definitely will use some of those principles that were important in 98. And then we'll also build on the 2010 planning process as well. The next step is technical research and analysis, and we have a list of items that we'll be looking at. I'm going to go over those in a little bit more detail when I talk about the plan, so I won't go through those in detail right now, so you don't have to listen to the same list twice. But an important process that we do is we look at your existing land use, and this is what we did in Gonzales, and then you look at the vacant land. And as you know, Gonzales has an awful lot of vacant land, but then we really explored and figured out what is constrained and what can be developed on and what can't be. And so then we made projections on future development on those lands that are developable. And we know that there's a lot of land here in the floodplain, and just like in Gonzales, some of that's developable, and we'll be looking at that as well. So throughout the whole planning process, from the very beginning to the very end, we have a very detailed and robust planning public outreach process where we'll be doing a lot of one-on-ones, meeting with people in cafes and talking to folks in every way we can. But we also hold public meetings where people work together in workshops and get a lot of the land use information by having people kind of build their future of what they'd like to see happen in the parish. Then we'll have a stakeholder committee that we're working with Jerome on. We're going to have a website, and we'll do online surveys because some people don't want to come to meetings, but they still want to participate. So we'll do everything we can to get as much participation as possible. We have clickers and all kinds of ways in our meetings to get input from folks. These are just some pictures of some of the processes we've had and what we go through. We do a lot of outreach. We'll have posters, and we will be asking y'all to send out email blasts and help us get people to the meetings as well. And then I mentioned the stakeholder committee. They aren't going to write the plan, but they certainly are our first line to make sure that we hope to have 15 to 20 really interested individuals who can let us know that we're on the right track, make sure we aren't embarrassing ourselves before we go out to the public, and really kind of test all of our ideas with them. And then one of the things that we're doing that's kind of new, and we didn't do this in Gonzales, but it's real important when you look at parishes, and we've used this tool in East Baton Rouge Parish, is to really test what different land uses look like. So that's a small area up there, but they, you can look at an area and you could either have really large lots, or you could have, people that say, well, I want some grocery stores and services, so I don't have to drive so far to get my needs met. And so we have people build maps like this, and then we put them all in the computer and develop scenarios based on what we hear from the public. So it really is a planning process that reflects the public input. The tool is called Envision Tomorrow. You can look at it online, and it's a tool that will be given to, it's based on GIS, and it'll be given to the parish once we've finished our work. But it's basically, it starts with buildings and then goes up to the region, so you can do any scale of analysis, and you get indicators out of it. So you can see what different land use patterns will require from a transportation cost, or what kind of taxes you'll get back on it, and what the cost will be to service it, and in water and that kind of thing. So a lot of information that are really hard numbers to help people make decisions on what that land use map should be. So the vision and comprehensive plan, we start with a vision that shows where people have all of those scenarios. We kind of meld them down to one big vision for the community, and then we write a plan that helps you get to that vision. It will have future land use, housing, transportation, mobility, drainage and stormwater, recreation, conservation, environmental resources, economic development. So the vision really talks about what we've heard from the public, and going through this process, we've always seen that people can look at that vision and see their input into it, and so that's a real important thing, to have that real directed input into this plan. The future land use will build on what you already have here, look at your existing, and then really give you a tool that you can use to guide growth when you're making your development decisions. Having different types of housing options is important in some places, and that's one of the areas that we'll look at, and making sure that people as they age have places to live here and can stay in the parish and afford to live here. And then, as I mentioned, we'll be coordinating with your transportation consultant, looking at access and infrastructure improvements, multimodal streets, and that kind of thing. So the document, as we compile it, will be very graphic oriented, have lots of maps, and not too much academic language in it. And it'll start with a vision, and then we'll have plan chapters that have policies and goals and strategies and actions that are clear and easy to follow. And then finally, we'll help you adopt the plan, and you'll have an implementation plan with it. And we will work with you through both the Planning Commission and the council meetings. And one of the key things is having a real clear priority of strategies to start on. And we usually have about 6 that are right off the top, things that you need to do that are easy to get done, and then a whole list of long-range strategies as well. One of the things that everyone acknowledges here at the parish is that you really, once you have a plan, you really need to have your development codes aligned with that plan, and so we will be doing an audit of your, just as we did in Gonzales, an audit of your ordinances, and we'll do some of the analysis and use charts to really put some of the standards you have now and what you might do in the future together, so you can see how the ordinances need to be rewritten. Our first steps are holding a kickoff meeting, identifying the committee with the staff, conducting interviews, touring the districts, and then holding that first committee meeting. So with that, I'll answer any questions you have.
Does anybody have any questions?
I just have one comment.
Absolutely.
I'm really excited.
Oh, great.
I'm really excited for Ascension Parish.
Thanks.
I think the people of Ascension Parish deserve the very best plan that we can provide for them, so that they can get a better handle of what the future is going to look for them. So.
Well, we really look forward to working with y'all on this. Thanks.
Yes, Commissioner Shannon.
I actually have quite a few questions. That might come to a shock to some people, but you outlined five different steps. What is your time frame on achieving those steps?
We are working with with Jerome right now to have a detailed schedule, but we're hoping to have, often what we do is we have the vision approved up front, and so we're hoping to have that approved by the end of the year, and then fill out the rest of the chapters in the next 3 months. So basically a 15-month period to have the document done, and then another 2 months hopefully for adoption.
Obviously, y'all did the Gonzales one. Is Gonzales's master plan that y'all have worked on, is that going to be incorporated into this one?
It will be coordinated with it, yeah, very closely, because when we did Gonzales, we also looked at the parish, but now we're in a real good position to make sure there's good connections there.
And what about the other two municipalities, Donaldson and Sorrento?
They will be working with them, and they will be included in this. And one of the things that I didn't talk about is we do a small area, kind of a small area focus workshop. And so either one or both of those would be a good place to do one of those workshops as well.
You had some listed constraints. What are some of the building constraints that y'all typically recommend?
Well, those constraints are more the ones in the buildable land analysis are the natural constraints of, floodplain and some places are habitat areas or whatever, for any reason that you can't build it, it's a park area or something. But as far as development constraints, we typically look at it more as, what types of uses and structures are desired, and then go from there. We don't really come in with a list of constraints, so I'm not sure I could answer that question right now.
No, that actually gives me a good answer. And then the public meetings and the public outreach. How do y'all kind of work those meetings? How do you, I hate to say the word referee, but if you have a lot of people who show up and all of a sudden everybody wants to be heard, or how do you get, if you have a group of people who might go from district to district to district and are really being forthcoming with their message, how do you handle all those things?
Well, the way that the workshops work, we have multiple different forums to work with, and sometimes we do just small group discussions, but then you're talking more about the public workshops, and we hope to anticipate how many people will be there so we have enough space. I have had workshops in one place that we had accommodated 500, but had to have an overflow, or had to have a redo, which if we have to have a redo, we'll do that. But the way that they're set up are 8 to 10 people sit around a table and work on a vision map, similar to those maps I showed you. And then at the end of the meeting, and it's facilitated, so each table has a facilitator to help the discussion flow. And then at the end of the meeting, that we have one person from each table stand up for 2 or 3 minutes and talk about what they, where they wanted different land uses and what the issues were and that kind of thing. I typically don't want to put any constraints on those because people sometimes can go to one and can't go to another, and we usually hold 2 or 3 of those throughout the parish, and so it's really managing how we do those. But I think people are open to come and participate. I would say that if someone has already at one meeting been a table representative, you'd probably want someone else to be. People don't need to be table representatives multiple times. There needs to be different speakers, but the facilitator helps facilitate that issue.
Gotcha. No, that was it. Thank you.
And, I know that Donaldsonville has its own plan. It's very outdated. I mean, it was done a number of years ago. So this will not include a special plan for Donaldsonville or a special plan for Sorrento. That's not kind of part of the contract. But we will decide, y'all will decide where you want that small area plan, just to make that clear. I didn't want you to think.
Thanks.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, thank you all for coming. It is very exciting, and it's exciting times that we're living in. The future is here, and we have to start accommodating that. So I appreciate y'all being here tonight in that thorough presentation. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
All right, before we move on to anything else, is there any other general business under item 6?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion to amend the ordinance. It's the first of the year, and we need to elect officers.
All right, I have a motion to amend the agenda to elect a chair and a co-chair for 2018. Do I have a second on that?
I'd like to second.
Second by, motion by Mr. Dumas, second by Mr. Furman. All in favor?
Aye.
Any in opposition? Hearing none, the motions, or the agenda is amended for the appointment of a chairman and a co-chair. Do we have any motions on that?
I'll make a move to recommend you to remain as chair and for Mr. Anthony Christie to remain as co-chair.
All right, we have a motion, well, I will
A
accept.
nomination.
Well, we need to have two
Yeah, let's
two
take them up
separates.
separately. Take up chairman first.
Okay, I'd like to make a motion to reappoint you as chairman.
All right, and I will accept that. Do we have a second on that motion?
I'll second Mr. Dumas.
Motion by Mr. Dumas, second by Mr. Bishop. All in favor?
Aye.
Any in opposition? Hearing none, the motion passes. Thank you, commissioners. As I said, this is an exciting time, and it's exhilarating to be at the head of this commission as we enter these times. All right, the second motion then, Mr. Dumas.
I'd like to make a motion to reelect Anthony Christie to be the co-chair of the planning commission.
All right, and do you accept? All right, so we have a motion by Mr. Dumas for Mr. Christie to be the vice chair, second by Mr. Chasson. Any, all in favor?
Aye.
Any in opposition? Hearing none, the motion passes, and the new officers are reappointed. Thank you very much. Moving on to item 7 is approval or denial of the minutes and written decisions of the December 13th, 2017 Planning Commission meeting. Do I have a motion on that? Motion by Mr. Christie, second by Mr. Schexnayder. All in favor?
Aye.
Any in opposition? Hearing none, the motion passes. Item number 8 is the consent agenda. There were originally 5 items on the consent agenda, all but item 8E has been removed. Item 8E is a final plat approval of Eagles Landing second filing, phases 2B, third filing, phase 3B, and tracks EL-2B and EL-3B by Fort and Tablada Incorporated. This is in Council District 5. Do we have a motion on this final plat approval on the consent agenda?
Just a point of clarity, so item 8B has been withdrawn from
Yes,
the...
I was advised before the beginning of the meeting that 8B has been withdrawn from the consent agenda. Is that right, Mr. Fournier?
It's up to the commission to pull that item from the consent agenda. There is an item I'd like to address on that. So
All
if
right.
you would agree to pull that item off the agenda, we'll discuss it.
Before
I'd
I
like to pull
entertain
it
a
on.
motion on that, I would like to read that into the record. The 8B is a final plat approval of Oak Lake subdivision, Phase 1, Quality Surveying and Engineering LLC, and that's in Council District 2. Mr. Dumas?
I'd like to pull that from the consent agenda. Do I need to make that as a motion?
And I was going to tell you, instead of amending the agenda, why don't you just take them up separately and vote on them separately since we...
Okay.
All
Well,
right.
we'll do that then. We'll go with 8B. First, final plat approval, Oak Lake subdivision, Phase 1. Mr. Fournier, you wanted to comment on that?
Yes. We did the inspection on that project last week, and there were some issues with some of the road conditions within the subdivision. I'd like to enter a letter into the record, and that was the purpose of pulling this off the agenda. Mr. Terrell, Joey Terrell will distribute that letter to you. Basically, it's a condition on them repairing the roads to alleviate some of the problems that were out there that we discovered during the inspection process. They're going to repair that road section with the construction of phases 2 and 3. We have agreed to that. They're going to also post an additional bond for that section of the road that they're repairing. So we're agreeing to what they're proposing here. If there are any questions about the details on this and how it's going to be conducted, Mr. Terrell, the parish engineer, can address that along with Mr. Derek Murphy, who's here, right? But we would just recommend that the parish, that the commission enter this letter into the record just so that we can have it on file, all right?
All right, and I'd like to add to this as well. Something that came to my attention earlier today, which is somewhat disconcerting, is that there was part of this development was a dedication of land to the public right-of-way for the expansion of Highway 44. As I understand, this is across from the Conway Plantation, or very near the Conway Plantation, which the dedication did appear on the preliminary map, but it is not on the final plat. And according to what I was told today, I've not been able to verify this, the dedication has not yet taken place of that land, and I think that needs to happen as well before we have finalized this plat.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, you're correct. The right-of-way was mentioned on the preliminary plat, it was designated. The lines are drawn on the final plat, but there's no notations that dedicate it. So I'll let Eric address that in a little bit more detail for you.
Yes, I
Please.
mean, they agreed to dedicate 20 feet plus 12 feet for a total of 32 feet for expansion of LA 44 there against their property. Everything is drawn correctly. They just inadvertently left that note off, and we'll verify and make sure that that note of dedication is on the final plat before it's signed and recorded.
All right, well, I will say in advance of all of this, that I'm not necessarily in favor of an additional bond, but if the staff is comfortable with it, I think that needs to be done. But I would, if I were voting on this, condition any approval of this final plat on having the dedication completed and indicated on the final plat of that public right-of-way. So,
Can I, because I'm confused, there was a recommendation to remove from the agenda completely today and then just take it up next month?
no, we're
or
taking
are
it up
we-
today separately
consent
outside of
agenda.
the consent agenda.
I got it, okay.
Yeah,
I misunderstood.
Chairman, may I speak for a second?
yes, Mr. Murphy.
Yes, we have been working as far as dealing with the dedication of those tracks. It is our intent to always dedicate those tracks. We've been working with the parish to come up with the traffic impact fee credits and also working with DOTD in order to get our approvals on our turn lanes. Everything's been submitted to DOTD. We have an agreement with DOTD. We just went through the transportation committee with this council in order to meet the transportation impact fee credits, in order for us to construct this portion of 44. The dedication was shown on the preliminary plat, but it never was said when the dedication would come. The roundabout has just been bid. It's just been awarded to a contractor, and it is going through the process as well as working out our entrance, our dedication, our construction plans are at DOTD for final approval. Everything's preliminarily been signed off on and fine, but it was all getting all this agreements and all this paperwork in, and also working out with the parish on what we was actually gonna construct. One time we were gonna construct a extended turn lane, then it was, no, we want to go ahead and build the entire lane, that's not a problem, whatever. So we worked through all those issues, and they've been working on for the last year. Everything's worked out at this point, and we're moving forward with the project. Everything is submitted to DOT for approval. The credits have been approved at the council level, and all the documentation was even turned in as late as today, because getting it all worked out with the council. So that's why the dedication hasn't occurred yet. All those steps had to happen. But it didn't say on the preliminary plat. We have fully intended on doing the dedication and doing these improvements. It's all part of an agreement that we have with the parish at this time. As far as the issue, every punch list item on this plat has been done, with the exception of, just so y'all know, the asphalt is great looking. We had some areas that are a little thin, less than the 3 inches that is required by code. At the time, when we do the second filing, we're going to come in and mill those areas and repair those so they meet the 3 inches. What this does is, it not only puts a 1-year maintenance bond on the road today, but it gives the parish an extra 1-year maintenance bond once we come in to the second and third filing. We thought it was a win-win situation. Instead of tearing up a new road right now, we can just mill it at the time when we come in and do the second phase. So that way, the parish ends up with an extra 1-year maintenance bond on that particular road, which is pretty much the intent of what went through not too long ago with the maintenance bonds here, because we're going to be using this to go forward. So all those issues, this was a very, the Highway 44 corridor is a very complicated corridor, a lot of moving parts. Money from City of Gonzales, money from Conway, money from DOTD, money from Oak Lake. It's getting built in pieces and parts, a lot of utility relocation. So we've been actively working on this with all the parties and going through. So just to let you know all that.
All right. Derek, let me ask you a question. So your impact fee credits has been approved by the parish council?
Yes.
Okay. And your plans and the plans for 44, which are at DOTD for final approval, your plat doesn't doesn't have any issues, any conflicts with those plans?
No, it's actually set up. If you notice, we have those tracks set up to do the formal dedication. That's why we broke the tracks out just like we did, to do the formal dedication to go along with those plans.
Okay,
Same thing with the roundabout is, we didn't, you know, the plans were finalized, you know, it's kind of was changing as well. So we just got recently the final geometrics. It went through, it's got DOT approval, and that's when we got our final geometrics and so forth for that, to make sure that we match all that.
okay. So the lane, the traffic circle, all that geometry is pretty much set.
Yes.
Okay.
Not only that, if you go out there and you look at it, you'll see that the front entrance of our subdivision, you'll see curb not started for several, you know, a couple hundred feet, or to the first intersection. That's a temporary road. We now know how it's all gonna tie together, so we built the entrance road as temporary, knowing it's coming out for the roundabout.
Okay.
That's why the curb stops where it does.
So what's the problem
So-
with indicating that on the final plat?
Well, it's not. It's actually in here. Well, you're talking about the dedication note?
Yeah.
So we didn't know when all the agreements and everything was gonna be worked out with the council and so forth. Like I said, today, it just got back to the council. Approved.
Okay, so last question. When do you anticipate having your plans approved by DOTD? A week, 10 days,
Probably within 30, 45 days.
that long?
Well, yeah, because you're looking at a roundabout taking 6 months or longer. Remember, the actual improvements were tied to the second filing of our plan
I
as well.
understand, no,
Yeah.
I'm more worried about getting the plans approved.
Yes, we figured 30, 45 days, which these guys just got awarded. They probably not going to break ground for another 30 days or 45 days on the roundabout.
Staff, does that sound right to get something approved by DOTD, 30 to 45 days? Sean?
That's an ideal situation, yes. But yes,
We've been working with them for quite some time already,
All right.
and we have it preliminarily approved. We just got to get the final paperwork.
Oh, so you do have preliminary approval?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Well, if that's the case, you know, then I don't mind conditioning your plat approval for the following. And that is that pursuant to this letter that staff is in concurrence with, you make the improvements at the appropriate time and post it required bond. You amend the plat to show the dedication, dedication language, and you have 60 days to dedicate the land.
You making a motion on that?
Well, hold on, Leo, because the land needs to be dedicated before we sign this final plat and they start selling lots. There's really no way to enforce it after the fact.
No, we can't.
Yeah, you can on the second, yeah.
Yeah, they can in future flats. I'm just giving them a time, a duration, in which case we stop issuing permits. He's got 60 days to dedicate the land. That takes him beyond the DOTD approval. He says 30 to 45 days. So I'm giving him 2 extra weeks to get the approval. At the end of 60 days, we stop issuing permits.
Are you making a motion on that?
Yeah.
So you're,
So I'm giving you a motion to do what you want to do, post a bond, all that good stuff. But within 60 days, you got to dedicate the land, and after which the parish can stop issuing permits.
if I could jump up, my name's Jake Lambert, I'm with D.R. Horton, the
Yeah, Jake, go
developer
ahead.
of Oak Lake subdivision. And I'd like to just add to what Mr. Murphy said about this. The reason that we have not indicated the dedication of track X-7 and X-8 to the parish at this point is, we want, before we formally donate this property, we want to make sure that we've got all of our paperwork in order with the state. We've got a preliminary approval, but before we would sign the agreement with the state, we had to make sure that we had the agreement in place with Ascension Parish.
But you've
All of
already,
that-
but
the
you've already
track-
solved your fees. You solved that problem.
That's correct.
Okay,
but
And so-
that's just happened, that's why.
that's fine.
Today. Okay. And moving forward from here, as soon as we get the final approval from the parish, then the formal dedication will occur. We would like for that not to hold up our final plat approval. And the teeth that you have as the parish is the traffic impact credit agreement that we've already agreed to hold our feet
No,
to the
he's
fire for
saying-
that.
He's saying sign it, but then 60
Is
days.
the traffic
I'm
fee,
saying-
is the traffic impact fee credit contingent upon the the right-of-way being granted, dedicated?
It has, in order for us to receive the traffic impact fee credits, we have to, by the nature of the agreement, complete the improvement, which require us to dedicate the property, right?
Right, so the credit.
It seems a little
the credit
redundant
agreement
if
that
that's the case.
Yeah. The credit agreement that was approved by the council states that they have to install the improvements in order to get the credit, right? So,
In a fashion that's approved by not only DOTD, but also reviewed, approved, and by Ascension Parish.
Yeah, but you understand that DOTD, I mean, whatever you do outside of us doesn't involve us, right? The only teeth I have is if I say, that's fine, we'll sign the plat. You're telling me it's going to take 30 to 45 days to get your final approval from the state, and I'm saying 60 days from now, you have to dedicate the land, which is beyond that approval. You've got everything else in place. I'm not saying you got to make the improvement. I'm saying you got to dedicate the land. But after 60 days, you haven't dedicated the land, we're going to withhold issuing building permits until you dedicate the land.
I think that's an unnecessary step for the simple fact that that is covered in the agreement that we've already entered with the parish in the traffic impact.
Yeah, but
fee.
that agreement only
Understood,
comes
but you
into
can
play
go
if
and
you build
amend
the
that
improvement.
agreement with the parish.
If for some reason we don't fulfill our obligations under the traffic impact fee credit agreement, then Ascension Parish begins to charge us impact fees.
Correct, but that really has nothing to do with the dedication of the right-of-way, and that's the
Right.
point I'm trying to bring up. Once you sign this final plat and it's recorded, they can sell lots.
Correct.
The subdivision is approved. I just want y'all to know that. You're not you're not conditioning the 60-day signing of the plat on the dedication. Your motion was to approve the final plat with the 60-day to let them, and you explained it better the second time that you understood that your recourse is you're going to withhold building permits. Because the subdivision will be approved and
The
they can sell
subdivision will be
lots
approved,
once
you can
it's
sell a
recorded.
lot, just nobody's going to be able to get a building permit until that land's dedicated, 60 days from the date signed.
Well, how can they build the lots if they can't get the permits?
The lots
Or-
are built.
I think the intent is to get the dedication accomplished and trying to give them a reasonable amount of time based on the assertions
Right.
that they made as to DOT approval. Because once we sign the final plat, if the dedication's not on there, this commission, which we're in charge of planning, has no ability to enforce that dedication. I mean, the council could do it. The council can come in and do whatever powers the council has, but we have no way of enforcing that.
Let's be clear here, we've worked really hard to make improvements on our own nickel in exchange for credits. You know, these are things that we've gone above and beyond. We've fulfilled the requirements of the parish. We've worked very closely with the parish. It's not a very simple process to coordinate between the parish, the state, various regulatory agencies. We're relocating utilities, we're relocating, a handful of utilities to make this come together. I assure you, we've invested quite a bit of time and effort to make this come together. We're going to do it the right way. And again, the teeth that you guys have, I just believe that this is an unnecessary extra step, but the teeth that you have is the agreement that we've already entered into with the parish council and that Mr. Jerome and his legal team has reviewed and approved.
Can I
Yeah,
ask?
but just to make it clear, Jake, so that the council understands, that credit impact fee agreement only applies to credits against the impact fees for the building of those lots. So it's not really, if you don't build it, you just pay the impact fee. So it doesn't really have to do with the dedication of the lot.
Right.
That's what I
And-
want y'all to understand.
Right, and so
That's
the,
precisely my concern. So my issue is that as a planning commission, the only thing I can do at this stage of the game is to listen to you. You've given me the parameters by which you're operating in. You believe you're going to have your final approval from DOTD in 45 days at maximum. And at which time you're going to be golden. All you got to do now is do the physical improvements. And all I'm trying to protect is that dedication, which isn't covered in anything here, and tell you, I'm willing to go out on the limb and support getting that plat signed so you can start selling lots, you can start moving on. But at the end of 60 days, I need that property dedicated to whomever you got to dedicate to, the state of Louisiana, the parish, the city of Gonzales, all three of them for all I care. As long as it's dedicated, it's in the public hands. If not, we're going to temporarily withhold issuing building permits until the dedication takes place. So you're in control of solving that problem, and I'm giving you the time to make that problem go away.
We have all reasonable, we have no reason to believe that this will not successfully be achieved.
Okay.
However, what concerns me is that if for some reason, for reasons that are beyond my control, my engineer's control, or the control of Ascension Parish government for that matter, that this is unsuccessful, then
come back
we're
after,
forced to
can come back
report-
in 45 days or 60 days and.
Ask for an extension.
We can give an extension on that.
That's a condition that we control.
I
We
mean,
can
and
extend
I
it.
look, Jake, I don't,
you see where I'm
you're a
going.
trustworthy guy. I don't have any issues
Sure.
that you're gonna do it, but things change. I mean,
Sure.
you know, in 60 days, things could be a lot different. So, I think what the questions that were being asked were, what is the time frame we're working under? You know, is it possible the DOTD could take longer than what they normally take?
I would suspect that.
Yes,
it's very
I would concede that it's a government agency, and I don't think anybody wants to hog tie anybody unnecessarily and put you on an unreasonable deadline. So, you know, I'm perfectly willing, and I think all of us are, and I agree with what Julio said. You know, if DOTD is dragging their feet in 60 days, you don't have that approval, then come back and just tell us that. And we can extend that out. But the point is, the concern for mine is that, you know, we moved to final plats on a consent agenda because the idea was having punch list items done.
Sure.
In my opinion, the dedication of certain land for a right-of-way is more than a punch list item. And I'd like to see that done before we approve it, or have a plan, at least know how we're gonna get there to get it done. And while, Jake, I trust you, I've known you
Sure.
for a long time, you're a good person, there's nothing in there. If we did that with everybody who wanted to come and say, no, we promise we're gonna do it,
Understand.
and then we sign that final plat, we have no mechanism of enforcing it down the road.
Sure.
And so we have to be consistent, and treat everybody equally on this and apply some standards.
What,
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Scheck-Snyder has a point.
I understand what Mr. Sean said, that 45 days would be an ideal situation. I do see what you're saying, Mr. Dumas, and I am, kind of leaning toward agreeing with you. However, I do believe that 60 days is not enough time. I would be much more satisfied if we extended it to 90 days. We generally give people 3 months if we ask something different. If we're gonna ask them to do something like this, given that we are dealing with DOTD, I would be willing to support something like that, and if we extended it to 90 days.
let me ask you a question, Jerome. Assuming the motion moves forward and everything, the plat's not going to be signed for a couple of days, right? A week or two?
That's correct.
Typically, yeah.
Okay. I'll even go far as to amend my motion and ask staff to automatically bring it back for the March hearing for evaluate compliance, how DOTD is coming, and at that time, grant them an extension of 60 days if the DOTD hasn't approved it.
Okay.
So you're talking about 60 plus another 60 on top of that, which is more than the 90 that you want. So do you have a
But-
motion on that?
Yeah, so I'll redo my motion again.
Okay.
So my motion
Well-
is to,
I'm sorry. I just want to ask, would that be more acceptable to y'all? Would that make things a little bit easier and
Yeah, I think we could.
take care of any,
We could-
unforeseen issues?
That should be reasonable.
So we shouldn't have any, quorums about that.
Can I make a point here? I guess I'm a little confused as to what's being accomplished here, because once the plat has been recorded, and we go to the courthouse and the plat's recorded, it becomes all of the individual lots that are within that first phase become legal lots. And at that point, D.R. Horton can come into the parish and they can pull building permits for every one of those lots, right? So when they pull a building permit, typically, the traffic impact fee is due and payable. But because we've entered into an agreement with D.R. Horton, because they're going to be building a section of 44, we're going to be giving them credits against the building permits, and they're not going to have to pay the traffic impact fee because they're constructing that portion of the road. I'm assuming that, once the plat's recorded, they're going to be coming in within maybe a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks in order to start pulling building permits to start construction on homes, right? Am I assuming that right?
Yes,
Jake?
sir.
Yeah. So at that point in time, we've already given them the credit, you know, to their building permits.
And
So-
they've already pulled all the permits, so
Yeah,
we couldn't.
so
yeah.
they basically could have pulled all the permits for the first phase within the next 30 or 60 days, right? So at that point, you know, I'm not sure what leverage we have at that point in time.
Because
Yeah,
at that
that's
point,
pretty
they've
good.
got.
That's
But
pretty
on,
Right.
at that point in
What they've got
time,
the
we are
credit.
bound by the credit agreement to construct the proposed improvements.
Right.
Which, in order to construct the proposed improvements, you must dedicate the land.
That's correct, and we've got
Right.
everything approved. We've got all of the preliminary approvals from DOTD, but we weren't gonna sign the DOTD agreement until we had the agreement with the parish to know how the financial aspect of the project was gonna work out, which that is recently being completed and now.
All right, well, I'm gonna go back to the question that I had earlier. Why can't the final plat be amended to indicate the dedicated land, even though, you know, you're waiting for final DOTD approval about how it's gonna look? It's gonna be on the space that was initially dedicated on the preliminary plat, correct?
So what we did, we drew the plat. The plat is, and this is a Derek question, but if you look at the final plat that I suspect you guys have a copy of, tract X-8 is a really weird shaped piece of property, right? And that's an individual tract of property that we've created so that we can dedicate that tract X-8 and X-7. Make it. Where at?
9.
Oh, yeah.
9.
Oh, excuse me, X9, X-9. So that all we have to do is dedicate those two individual tracks, and it's really simple, and it's already set up and ready to go as soon as we get all our paperwork straight. We've already got our paperwork straight with the parish, get the final paperwork straight with the state. We're gonna dedicate those tracks. And again, the teeth that you guys have is the credit agreement. If we do not satisfy the requirements of that credit agreement, then the agreement has provisions in it to enforce ramifications upon us for not complying with.
Well, I guess the question is if it's just a simple matter of it's going to be those two lots, why can't we just dedicate the lots now before it's
Because
recorded?
I don't have everything finished with the state yet. We are not willing to give the parish property until I have the final agreement with the state, right? I think that's pretty clear that shouldn't dedicate property till we've got all of our assurances from the state that, in fact, everything is gonna be done. The ink has to be dry before we give the property up.
But
if that
I
makes
guess
sense.
the issue, as I'm understanding it with the impact fee, so you file the plat as is, then you pull your permits, you get the credit for the fee. Something happens, I don't know, you decide it's cheaper just to pay the impact fee than it is to build the road. You decide, okay, we'll pay the fee instead of the road. The parish still needs to build that part of 44. They can't build the road. You own it. And then now they have to go back and try to purchase it from you, potentially for more than what the traffic impact fee was. And there's no teeth to prevent that from happening because we already approved the plat. That's the issue, right? Or am I missing something?
Just so y'all understand, the impact fee credit agreement just deals with the impact fees. Now, they do get an advance, you know, to use now for something that's supposed to build. If they don't build, then there's provisions in the contract that talk about the money that will exchange hands.
All right, and Cody, if I'm hearing everything correctly, it seems to me that we have one of two options tonight. We can approve it as is, and there's no guarantee in here that the right-of-way will ever be dedicated, or we can deny it, deny the final plat approval until the right-of-way is dedicated. There's no middle ground, in other words.
But you don't have to deny it, you can condition the approval. You can withhold signing a final plat until it's dedicated, if that's the option you choose.
Okay.
You just didn't have to outright deny it.
All right, but the middle ground that Jerome tried to achieve is not possible, because as soon as it gets approved, they can start pulling permits.
Can I say
Yes,
something, Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Bosher.
I don't see the credit agreement for the traffic impact fees and the building of the road and the dedication of the tract are three completely separate things. One is not contingent on the other. The preliminary plat was approved contingent on that dedication taking place. That dedication needs to take place because if they don't build the road, they don't get their credits. But if they don't build the road, somebody's going to build the road, and the parish has been promised and needs to be delivered that right-of-way before the final plat is signed. It doesn't matter what DOTD's timing is or anything like that. The alignment of the road has been decided preliminarily, and in my opinion, I think that it was put in the preliminary plat that said this is going to be dedicated to the parish for the expansion of the road, and it needs to be done that way. And regardless of who builds the road, building the road is the deal with the credit. The dedication of the right-of-way don't have anything to do with building the road right now or the credits. Okay. So that's my 2 cents.
No one's denying that it needs to be dedicated. It is on the preliminary plat, but did it specify on the preliminary plat, was it filing 1 or phase 2? That's another issue. When we talked, we linked a lot of the traffic improvements to phase 2. We're not trying to wait to phase 2. We're trying to do it now, trying to get our paperwork straight and trying to get it resolved.
Anything
I think, is there any more comments or questions by the commission?
Would this be better served if we defer this till, next month's meeting?
No, sir. We would prefer to, entertain, Chairman, Commissioner, Dumas's, proposal would be more preferable.
I don't know that a formal
than to
motion
deny
has
it.
been made on that because Mr. Funia jumped in on it.
I want to go back to my original motion. I hear you, Jerome. You're just going to have to notify the building department. But my motion is going to be that I'm going to make a motion to approve contingent upon them, on them complying with the requirements of this letter dated January 10th, 2018, which the parish is in agreement with, posting the required bond, and the dedication of that land within 60 days, after which the planning department will notify the building department that there are no more permits to be issued following, March 10th, 2018.
All right, we have a motion on the floor. Do we have a second?
I'd actually like to make a substitute
We
motion.
have a substitute motion by Mr. Scheck-Snyder.
I concur with what Mr. Dumas has said, but I would extend it to 90 days.
All right, we have a motion as stated by substitute motion as stated by Mr. Scheck-Snyder. And I want to be clear before we vote, or do we have a second on that?
I'll second.
All right, we have a second by Mr. Christie. Before we vote, Mr. Fournier, can you notify the planning, the permit department about that contingent?
Yes, I can. But if we're going to give them 90 days, I forget how many lots there are in the first phase. They could conceivably have pulled building permits for all 57 lots, or however many lots there are in
They
there.
could pull it in
Yeah.
30 days or 60 days for all of them
Yeah.
as well.
So the 90, what you're saying is the
It's-
90 days may eventually mean nothing.
Essentially.
Well, and I want to make myself clear. The only reason I'm willing to say 90 days instead of 60 is because I do believe that whenever they say 45 days with DOTD, as an ideal situation, I agree. I think that might be unachievable. If we generally ask people to come back in 3 months, that's just what my opinion was. I don't mind having them come back within 3 months to come back to us if they need to check on something like that.
All right, we have a motion on the floor and a second. Any further discussion on this? All in favor?
Aye.
Any in opposition?
Aye.
Aye.
All right.
We'll go around. You want reasons for all votes? Cody?
Sure. That's
Mr.
the best
Dumas.
way. Well,
No, for the reason that 90 days is excessive, and I believe that the 60 days have the ability to come back and get an extension. The
All right.
DOTD is in fact delaying them.
All right, Mr. Furman.
I'm in favor. I feel the 90 days is reasonable, considering what we heard the expectations are by DOTD.
All right, Mr. Bishop.
I vote in favor of the 90-day motion because I think 90 days is a an amount of time that we normally ask, and is fair.
Mr. Christie.
I think it's customary that you give that amount.
Okay. That's a yay? Mr. Christie votes yay. Mr. Chasson.
I vote no. I think the dedication needs, as indicated by staff, needs to take place before signing of the final plat. I would have voted to approve a motion that would have approved the final plat contingent upon the dedication of the right-of-way, so the opposite. In other words, the right-of-way be dedicated and then the plat be approved.
All right, Mr. Schexnayder.
I vote yes, I made the motion, and while I do agree with Mr. Dumas on those stipulations, I would like to have the customary 90 days as stated.
All right, the chair votes no on the basis that I agree with what Mr. Poche said. I think they're separate things. The final plat is the punch list items. I don't think this is a punch list item. And I think that needs to have those ducks lined up before we finally approve this. But that being said, the vote's 4-3. The motion carries on the 90 days and contingent on the bond as stated in the letter of January 10th, 2018. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
All right, item 8, E is the major subdivision final plat approval for Eagles Landing, second filing, Phase 2B, third filing, Phase 3B, tracks EL-2B and EL-3B, Forte and Tablata, Inc. And I'll just ask staff, we're down to punch list items on this?
Yes, everything's been taken care of. There's a couple of little housekeeping items, but those will be taken care of prior to the plat being signed.
All right, do we have a motion?
I'd like to make a motion to approve
Motion by
based
Mr.
on satisfaction of all the punch list items.
Motion by Mr. Schexnayder, second. Second. By Mr. Furman, all in favor?
Aye.
Any in opposition? Hearing none, motion carries. Moving on then to item 9 on the agenda is a public hearing to approve or deny the following family partition. 9A is the Sylvia Smith property, lots 3A, 3B, 3C, and 3D, Quality Engineering and Surveying. Yes, sir.
George McCallum with Quality Engineering and Surveying, representing the Smith Estate. This is a family partition for the heirs of the Smith Estate, and we're asking for approval.
All right, staff?
Yes, all items that meet the code, and there's a predial servitude that has to be taken care of before we get the plat signed. All items will be taken care of prior to requesting final signature.
All right, we'll go ahead and open a public hearing on this. Ms. Stacy, has anyone signed up to speak on this matter? Then we'll close the public hearing on this. Any questions, comments, or a motion by the commission?
Move we approve.
Moved by Mr. Furman, second. Second by Mr. Chasson, all in favor?
Aye.
Any in opposition? Hearing none, motion passes. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
All right, item 10 on the agenda is a public hearing to approve or deny the following preliminary plat. I assume that's Cambray Oaks Subdivision, Louisiana Land Surveying, LLC.
Calm.
Okay, calm, I stand corrected. Some people say Cambray. Yes, sir.
I'm Jeff Cook, Louisiana Land Engineering here, I'm representing the developer. We're proposing a 90-lot subdivision on about a little over 30 acres on Corner View, which is a state highway. So any issues we have with connection, we'll have to go through the state and get their approval. For drainage, we've proposing a detention pond at the rear of the subdivision, and we will detain and hold our peak flows back to, or actually below the existing peak flows. I understand there may be some concern about there's a ditch coming from our west, and it intersects our property. It is actually below where we're proposing lots, and so we're simply going to direct that flow to Bayou Francois and actually intercept some of the flow that's going to that ditch and put it in our pond. So we'll detain that area. We're proposing also to cut some, excavate along the Bayou Francois, which will increase the conveyance of that channel. Got any questions? Be glad to answer them. Got a traffic engineer here also.
All right, staff?
The plat meets all of the guidelines for major subdivision. The preliminary plat comments have all been addressed. The drainage and traffic impact study, the comments have been addressed. Mr. Shiro could answer to those if you have any more specific questions about either one of those.
We'll go ahead and open a public hearing on this. Ms. Stacy, has anyone signed up to speak on this?
Yes.
All right. Before we have the first person come up to speak, I would please remind you, we have quite a few people here tonight, and so we're not here all night. And the first issue we took up notwithstanding, we try to limit our public comments to 3 minutes. There is a clock in front of me, and there's one in front of the podium, so we all can see, and after 3 minutes, the buzzer sounds. So please try to contain your remarks to 3 minutes, and we'll have the first person come up, please, Ms. Stacy.
Ronald Daigle.
Mr. Daigle.
I'm Ronald Daigle. I live due west, northwest of this proposed project. I'm the small landowner in that northwest corner. I want to address your packet that you have in front of you to page 17, if you will. There's a couple of things I have to point out that are not covered in the traffic impact study, along with another subdivision that was built up Cornerview that had only 100 houses, and they have a turning lane. We have Legacy Oaks. If you read this section, Legacy Oaks, this additional traffic in Legacy Oaks was not taken into this subdivision in the survey, along with the new traffic that this subdivision is proposing. I feel that at this time, this should be denied because we need to go through a full study of this traffic impact. You people don't live there. I do. I know what's going on with this traffic. I'd like to know who made the study and under what conditions. I'd like to see an independent study because this is definite. Boudreaux Roads is not taken into this study, which I know some of this traffic coming down Cornerview goes down Diaz. So therefore, I think this study, this needs to be looked at seriously before we approve the preliminary, much less the final. Also, I have a problem with drainage. A large portion of my property drains across this property, which if you look at lot 5, I think it's lot 5, my property drains across that section where lot 5 is. In fact, from lot 2 to lot 5, all that land drains across that property, up to lot, I think lot 12, somewhere in there. That land all drains down to that one section, and then it drains due east. So we definitely need some kind of drainage cut. If they're going to go in and fill all this land in, we definitely need some kind of drainage cut going to the back. I don't know what y'all gonna do. That's up to, I talked to Eric about it, and it was a concern. He told me to just bring it up. And the last thing I want to bring up is some kind of buffer between me and this subdivision. I have chickens. My son, who's gonna speak later, has cattle and goats. We definitely need some kind of buffer between the two of us. We talked about maintaining rural character. He'll talk about that more. And in the few seconds I have, I'd also like to see this playground move to the other side of the area.
Thank you, Mr. Daigle.
Bill Landry.
Thank you, Chief.
Brett Daigle.
Good evening, members of the Planning and Zoning Board, the Commission. My name is Brett Daigle. I reside on Alcee Daigle Road. My wife and I are the adjacent landowner. Our property has been in the family since the mid-1960s and has been in farm and livestock production since its establishment. We currently operate Daigle Ridge, Calico, and show goats. Our main goal is to provide show stock for our kids and other 4-H and FFA families. My concerns with this proposed development are threefold. Traffic, like my dad talked about, since the Legacy Oaks development and the construction of Carver Primary, there's been a significant increase in cars traveling on Cornerview Road. This even with Legacy Oaks not even being completed yet. Adding an additional 90 houses or 180 cars every day would add more congestion and a hazard. I would like to see an additional traffic study, as Dad said, showing the impact after Legacy Oaks is completed and during the peak hours during school time. Drainage, as Dad talked about, currently our fields drain across both the front and the back part of the property and the main ditch at the center. With the flood in 2016, 3/4 of the pasture was underwater, most of which drained by the large ditch in the back. I'd like to see info added that calculated drainage from across our fields as well. Security, yeah, this is a big one for me. The country people live here because of the serenity and the peacefulness. The proposed construction will be throwing numerous people adjacent to the fields that our cattle and goats use to produce, our cattle and goats survive on. My request is that the commission require a 6-foot wooden fence to maintain the privacy and the protection of both our family and the business. Also, to have the proposed playground moved to a different area to cut down on the noise and any kind of impact to our fields. Also, I wanted to bring up that I was not notified about this meeting. I purchased that 14.5 acres in the latter part of November of 2016. So I did not get a letter about this. Thank you.
Gwen Molaire?
Hello, I'm Gwen Molaire, and my land is on the east side, I guess you can say, of the property that they're gonna develop. And my concern is just so that they put up privacy fence, a buffer fence or something along that side, because the way they having the houses built, the back of the houses are gonna be facing like my house. And I would just like to be able to look out my window and not see the back of their houses. So is that a possibility that they can build, y'all can put fences up? All right, that's my only concern. If y'all could see to that we have some type of fence put up along that side. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Molaire. That's it? Anybody else to speak on this matter? All right, we'll close the public hearing on this. Any questions, comments? And I would ask the, well, I'd ask the engineer, or, do you think that y'all can put up a fence to accommodate the neighbors?
What I'm being told, it can be put in the restrictions to make each builder put it in as they build each lot.
Yeah.
I have a couple of questions when you're
Yeah.
finished before we.
So, I think that might accomplish the purpose. That would be on every lot that faces, not the interior lots, but every exterior lot.
Exterior lot, right.
That might do that.
I mean, they could easily come back and say, well, why don't you build a fence?
Yeah.
I mean, that's something they could say.
Right.
I don't disagree that the homeowners would like the buffer, but the developer could, consequently come back and say, well, you build a fence. I'm not saying I disagree with that or not, but that is something that they could say as well, and they would have that right.
I don't know that we can require it as a condition of approval, but, putting it in the restrictions and making each
If they put it in the
developer,
restrictions, that would possibly satisfy.
they're making each developer, as they develop the lots, put a fence up there, 6-foot wood privacy fence, should accomplish that purpose. And outside of us having the authority to qualify it, I think that's probably a happy median. I would like to ask, though, Mr. Giroux, about the drainage, the drainage concerns that were raised. From what Mr. Cook said, it seems like they're taking on more water than they necessarily need to. Are we satisfied that the neighboring properties are going to continue to drain as normal through that property, or not be blocked from draining through that property?
Yeah, keep in mind, this is at a preliminary plat level. And at this stage, they have provided a drainage study indicating where water is draining at this point. After this, there's additional investigations, looking at the sites. There's also during the detailed construction plan time, we start determining exactly what size ditches, culverts, pipes are needed to intercept flow on the perimeter. For a situation like this, they are required to provide a rear yard ditch, most likely a swell ditch. It's actually in the code already, so they're required to do it, and that's intended to intercept any off-site water and to prevent their water from draining off-site through the
So that
drainage.
alleviates, or that
Right.
assuages the concerns of Mr. Daigle, as he stated, about wondering where that water that drains off his property through Lot 5 is going to go.
Yes.
All right.
And that would that entail and make that drainage go south toward Bayou Francois?
Yes, the intent of all design is to keep following the path, the direction where it ultimately drains to. So right now, this water drains towards the canal. It would be used into a ditch system that either goes directly into the pond or bypasses the pond, but it will all end up into the bayou.
And then, and my final question, and I'm sorry, Mr. Chasson, I'll let you get on there in just a second. In looking at the traffic analysis, both AM and PM, there's corner view at Legacy Oaks Drive, corner view at Burnside, and corner view at Boudreaux Road. So I think those are probably the three closest intersections. And it seems that none of the post-development will not exceed the pre-development standards of those intersections, or pre-development service use at those intersections. Is that correct?
Yes.
In other words, the level of service will remain the same. Some of those intersections, Corner View Road westbound at Burnside is a C, Corner View Road eastbound at Burnside is a D, but it's not going to get any worse from this development. Is that correct?
Correct. These are cut and paste from the traffic study, yes.
They do have one that does.
Actually, there's three.
At least
that was
one,
my
yeah.
question. I see three service drops on here, and that maybe I'm misunderstanding. But in the AM corner view, the Legacy Oaks Lane southbound drops from a C to an E. In the PM, Legacy southbound drops from a B to a C, and then corner view eastbound drops from a D to an E.
Correct.
Am I reading that correctly? So there is level of
There is.
service drop, one a pretty significant C to an E.
Well,
right?
one at CBD, remember, that is the driveway of Legacy Oaks itself. Okay, so you imagine most entrances of a subdivision across from another subdivision, once you add it, those would experience, the biggest change relative to no one across from them. So that is not uncommon for a subdivision entrance across from the subdivision entrance. That delay is on for those, for those trying to leave Legacy Oaks.
So
And you don't think it warrants a roundabout there, does it?
That is ultimately DOT's decision, but highly unlikely that they would warrant this. Actually, Legacy Oaks itself, it had its own traffic study, and they would also, at that time, they didn't need an additional left turn lane on their part or a left turn lane into their subdivision. But once again, this is a DOTD route. They, as a part of their permitting process, this project, that will also be something that DOTD will look at.
One of the concerns that I had that you had mentioned was that y'all were going to possibly excavate even further into Bayou Francois to increase flow. Is that
We would excavate off, so you have a channel, we'll come up the bank a little bit and excavate back and giving you more flow area through our property.
I could be wrong, but from what I understand, anytime that we start dealing with a major, I guess bayou in that sense, don't we have to get Corps approval or anything like that?
You'd have to have a wetland study, and typically that's in the wet part of, it would be other waters, and we don't plan to get into the other waters. Typically, there's a shelf, and you stay above that shelf and excavate behind that shelf.
And there are no additional studies necessary for this?
For excavation?
Yes.
We'll include that in our plans, but no studies for, no Corps permits or anything like that that I'm aware of. Right. Yeah, we go to through EADD to get their permit.
Okay. And I see that basically half of the bayou is in the city limits. Do we have to worry about anything dealing with city infrastructure, any city interference?
the city.
Okay.
Sean, back to the traffic, what about the level of service drop Cornerview eastbound from D to an E? Is that in a subdivision as well?
I'm trying to find, all right, you're in the PM?
In the PM, yeah. There's two in the PM. There's the Legacy, the same one, Legacy Oaks, that drops from a B to a C.
Yes, that did drop a
And
level of
then-
service from DD.
And that's
One
all-
thing is, you have to keep in mind the threshold. Are you more concerned about the seconds and the drops or just be in a different classification? You notice that one, you're asking about just because I had a D from an E, that was less than a 6-second delay in that direction, but the overall rating for the intersection still remained at a D.
Well, on here, it's listed an E, from a D to an E.
But the overall, that's one movement, yes. But if you look at Cornerview at Burnside Avenue intersection altogether, remains at a D to a D. But if you get down to the movement analysis, you are correct. The eastbound did drop from it went from a D to an E because it crossed over the threshold about 6 seconds.
I guess what kind of concerns us is that, these things, and like Mr. Daigle said, we do have a cumulative effect. And while we don't necessarily, each traffic study is not showing that there is individual changes, these cumulative changes are starting to add up in this area.
Mr. Chasson, I just, for the threshold for an E, the trigger point from going from from a DD is 55-second delay.
Well,
So
I
that's
guess,
one, it was close to that threshold just by 6 seconds, now tripped it over to an E.
well, I guess my question is, we're told on one hand, if the level of service number doesn't, or letter doesn't change. So if it's a C and it stays a C, then we have to approve. Then we get one where it drops from a D to an E, and it's really only 6 seconds, so you don't really need to take into account that it drops from a D to an E. Well, what's the threshold from an E to an F? And when the next one comes along, well, now it's an E. If it's 15 seconds from an E to an F, if the next one adds 10 or 12, but it doesn't quite get to an F, then it's still within the E. And then you've got somebody else comes along and goes the additional 2 seconds to drop it from an E to an F, and then it's, it dropped from an E to an F, but it was only 2 seconds. I mean, at what point is the drop significant enough where it's like, okay, let's actually consider the
Do
traffic
something
impact?
about it.
And I'm going to ask a different question. What is the standard for correcting that and mitigating against that drop in the level of service?
Usually each jurisdiction has their own definition of what is considered unacceptable. If I have to ask the traffic engineer, I know from the two-way analysis, I forgot where it is traditionally, definitely an F. An F is bad, okay? That's an easy one right there.
But before we
D
had
and E-
one that was an F and was going to make an F a worse F, and we were told, well, you can't deny it because it's already an F. So, I mean, at what point do we actually say, hey, we actually have a traffic impact study showing a change in level of service, but don't really pay attention to it?
I don't recall anyone saying not paying attention to it. If you're referring to earlier, the conversation back, me answering questions, Commissioner Pryor, we were focused on the overall intersection itself grade when we were going down each one. So I wouldn't mean to imply that none of them dropped. I think we were focused intersection level as an overall intersection, that none of them dropped as letter grade.
Okay, and I would just also point out that so the one drop is just from the nature of having the new subdivision driveway, correct?
Yes.
All right. But the other two drops are at Cornerview and Burnside, which are within the city limits. So my question is, and I don't know if there's an answer to this question, how does our jurisdiction as the parish to require changes be made inside the city limits to meet these standards? And can we even do that?
More than likely would have to be driven through DOTD.
I was going to say, I mean, you get into
It's a
the
DOTD
argument
signal.
of parish versus city, but really and truly, when it's state roads, they've always said state controls that, any intersection.
Okay, so DOTD is going to have their own requirements that come in on this. Is that what you're telling me, Cody?
Yes, that's correct.
All right, so if DOTD has this, and what Sean is telling us is that we're looking at the overall of the intersections, not just necessarily one specific time period or phase.
Yeah, I mean, you can carve this down however you want. But traditionally, you look at the overall intersection itself, and then you start looking for, you know, are particular turning movements being drastically changed, I mean, delay-wise, to where it would then warrant to start looking, does an additional left turn lane? A lot of these things, this minor changes could be corrected just by signal timing changes. You know, how long do you have before the green stays green, before the next section turns red? Do you do this green overlap? With
Which is a
real time?
DOTD decision.
DOTD decision also.
That should be at that point, that should be at the city of Gonzales decision, at
Well,
corner view of Burnside.
No,
Those
it's
are
DOTD.
those are two state roads, so state highways that come in. Okay.
Well, this was a level 2 study threshold. I know normally we have 1. What's the difference between the 1 and the 2?
Why did they trigger the 2?
I'm sorry.
This one is listed as a study threshold level 2.
Yes.
I know we've talked in the past about the different levels.
yes.
Why is this one a 2, and what's the difference?
It's the number of peak hour trips that your development generates. So this one generates more than 75 is the number in the current traffic impact policy. So if you more than 75 trips, peak hour leaving your development, now you have to start analyzing nearest adjacent intersections. That's why this project's looking at intersections that we may not have heard at other ones because they were below the 75 level.
So we're going out further
Going
because
out
there's
further.
more trips.
Yes.
It's actually a little bit more accurate.
All right, I think we've discussed this. Unless anybody has anything else, I'm going to ask for a motion or any other comments.
Well, I had a comment on the dredging of Bay Francois.
I just want to ask a question about the ditch. You know, this perimeter ditch that's along the property line, how can we be sure that that ditch, that swale, in its final configuration, we don't end up in a situation where we've got, you know, these lots that are 3 feet higher than the adjacent piece of property, and then we've only got, you know, what, 15 feet to compensate for that change in grade and a swale?
Yes, 15 feet is just the estimated width that it needs at this time for preliminary plat level. We have a lot of rear yard ditches, servitude to some times that grow from 25 up to 25 feet if the ditch, something as much larger is needed than just a traditional swell ditch.
No, I'm just concerned because this dirt's going to be a lot higher than the adjacent property owner. And I just want to
I
make
don't
sure.
anticipate it being, I mean, we're already 100 year, so I don't anticipate it being 3 foot. I mean, I would think 1 foot in that area right there. It's 100 years at 9, and that line over there varies from 12 to about 9, I think, at where that ditch is.
Yeah.
So we're above 100 year, about 2 or 3 feet in that area that you're talking about.
All right. Okay.
So,
Mr. Furman had a question.
Yes, on your work on Bayou Francois, is that being done because of restrictions there that you're going to clear out to improve the flow, or is it strictly for beautification?
Actually, where we would fill below 100 year, we want to use that. That's the most effective area to take the dirt from.
Okay.
So it's actually to fill up to 100 year. We want to take that that dirt there.
Yeah, so it's not going to improve the flow out of that area downstream then?
No, not
because you still have the
downstream.
same restrictions downstream.
That's correct.
And the other thing on your roadways, I see you have two potential side exits, entrances. That is that there for future, or why was that drawn that way? You have one.
Your stub outs are based on code.
Mhm.
We have to have stub outs to the adjacent property.
Right, right.
You have certain block links you have to meet.
But they're not tied into anything?
Not, well, the one to the east, there's a road there.
Mhm.
To the
Where's
west,
that?
it's in the event that the property
So
to our west is developed.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Real quick. Where you said that you had your elevations, the land is in flood zone AE and X. So in one part, we're looking at what you said, a possible 3 foot difference in elevations?
Correct.
Okay. When you have your final elevation, I'm pretty much assuming that you want to try to make this, I guess you want to say, as flat as possible. What is your final elevation that you're going to be in base flood elevation?
Base
If
flood's
it's
9,
at,
yeah.
it's
Base
going to be at
flood's
9. So you're going to build your houses at minimum at 10?
Well, this is that's what I would like to do. When you do detention ponds and you make them wet, you end up having, to make a healthy pond, you gotta dig 6 feet below that. So you have that excess dirt that you have to deal with, and you put that on the lots typically. But, to answer your question, we don't wanna fill any more than we have to. Obviously, that's cost. So in that area that is above 100-year, we'll typically have street cuts. So we really don't want to put fill at all in those areas. That makes.
I guess what I'm saying is ultimately, in the, let's say that's flood zone X.
Right.
If the BFE ends up for it to be flood zone X, you're looking at probably at least 12 feet. Then, without drastically changing it, you're going to have to build the floor at least 13 feet.
But keep in mind, 100 years 9. But I don't want to fill in the 12 area.
Well,
I don't want to fill there.
but that's what I'm asking is that how much you alter it? Is that in the 12?
I don't want to alter that at all in that,
Right.
in that 12 area.
But our code states that you have to build the floor at least BFE plus 1, no matter
Well,
wherever
you're
it
12,
is.
so you're above that plus 1. So you wouldn't fill there.
But you're in a
You'd
different
actually probably
flood
have
zone.
street cut.
Okay.
No,
So-
we're not in the flood zone in that 12 area.
Well, you're not in the flood zone, but you still have to meet whatever that code is.
Oh, absolutely.
Whatever the BFE is.
I understand what you're saying, but in that area in the 12, 11, 10, you don't want to fill that area.
No. Well, that's just what I'm worried about is if we're cutting, if he does cut for an area that is considered Zone X, and if Zone X for a specific height reason, if we cut it down to 11, is that still considered Zone X? At Zone X, you don't have to have flood insurance. At Zone AE, you do.
We will not cut down that 12 to 11. Only in your street cut. You'd have street cut. You wouldn't fill or cut those lots. There's no reason to do that.
Okay.
Any other questions, comments? Do we have a motion?
I'm going to make a motion to approve. I don't see any, I would love for him to put a fence on it, but I don't think we can do that.
Well, I think we can make a contingent upon his assertion that he'll put it in the subdivision restrictions.
Right.
All right, we have a motion to approve with the caveat that the subdivision restrictions require the outside lots to have a 6-foot wood privacy fence. Do I have a second on that motion?
I'll second them.
Second by motion by Mr. Dumas, second by Mr. Bishop. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Any in opposition?
Nay.
All right, we'll go around with a roll call vote. Mr. Dumas?
Yes.
Mr. Furman?
Yes.
Mr. Bishop, I'm sorry.
Yes.
I'm getting tired. Mr. Christie?
Yes.
Mr. Chesson?
No, and you need me to state. the
Yes,
reasons.
please.
No, based on the traffic impact study showing a decrease in level of service at Legacy Oaks southbound in the AM from a C to an E, a decrease in Legacy Oaks southbound in the PM from a B to a C, and a decrease in Cornerview Road eastbound in the PM from a D to an E.
All right, and Mr. Schexnayder?
I'm actually agreeing with Mr. Chasson. I'm going to support that. I'm going to vote again, no, for the traffic study reasons.
All right, and the chair votes in favor. The chair votes yea, so the vote's 5-2 in favor, or in support of the motion, so the motion of approval carries at hand. Thank you, gentlemen. All right, the next item on the agenda is number 11, staff report.
Very briefly, Mr. Chairman, I would like to report to the commission that we met with H&TB, our consultant on our floodplain management program this morning, and we're going to be moving forward with a couple of work sessions with council members and commissioners about our drainage impact policy, the study policy. That was up for discussion tonight. There's another study that's out there. We're going to be looking at our traffic impact study policy as well. That's going to be under a different contract, but we'll report back to you at that time. Mr. Poche has a couple of comments he'd like to make.
Okay, we had two projects that were approved or given extensions because of didn't have submission of construction documents within 6 months of preliminary plat approval for Ascension Business Park as well as Black Bayou Estates. We would like to have those on the meeting next month to allow those consultants to come and either ask for another extension or explain the status of where they are. As well as, that would be for the second extension or an additional extension for those two. And then the Vines, that was approved in August, the original preliminary plat was approved in August. That will be, February will be 6 months since they've been approved with no construction plans. So we would like to have that.
Do we need a motion on that?
Where is the Vines located? Which one was that?
That's the one on Mr. Shafter Kling's property, just
Okay.
on the other side of 74 overpass.
Go ahead and make a motion to set it on next
All
month.
right. Do we have a motion to set those two things on next month's agenda?
I'll So moved.
By Mr. Chasson, second by Mr. Dumas. All in favor?
Aye.
Any in opposition? Hearing none, motion passes. That's it.
Move.
Making a motion to
Oh,
adjourn.
not there yet.
Oh, never
Yeah,
mind.
engineering staff report.
I see you didn't expect much, Mr. Sherrill. There's no engineering report tonight.
All right, now I need a motion to adjourn. All right, we'll take a brief recess and return in a few minutes with a zoning meeting. Thank you.